At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. And what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's get into today's story. The shuttle was a small, sterile thing, a diplomatic courier designed for comfort over intimidation. Inside, Ambassador Aiden Furrow smoothed his shirt front for the 10th time. The shirt depicted a riot of hibiscus flowers and broad green leaves against a backdrop of eye-watering sunset orange. He had chosen it to project the perfect balance of confidence and nonchalance, but was beginning to suspect it was a catastrophic mistake. "You're sure about this?" Jazz Chandler asked, her voice thin. She sat opposite him, fidgeting with her own T-shirt's frayed hem. Her black T-shirt, softened by countless washes, featured a skeletal mascot in a business suit clutching a scythe. Above it, in an aggressive, jagged font, was the single word, Decimator. "Absolutely," Aiden said, flashing the smile that had disarmed trade union leaders and pacified rogue colonial governors. Jazz's expression remained flat. "Jazz, think about it. For decades, the Apex Compact has been watching us. They've seen our wars, our art, our ridiculous reality television. They know we're chaotic, emotional species. Showing up in polished battle plate and spouting formal greeting would be a performance. We're leaning into the brand." "Our brand is thrash metal and bad vacation wear?" she muttered, pulling at her sleeve. "Our appeal is unpredictability. Confidence. We're the new kids on the block, walking into the toughest neighborhood in the galaxy. We do it by walking in like we own the place, smiling and offering to buy the first round, keeping our chests relaxed instead of aping their traditions. It's the human way." "The human way usually involves a bar fight breaking out right after the first round," she pointed out, staring at the viewport. Through it, the fulcrum was growing from a speck of dark glass into a continent-sized behemoth. More a carved and hollowed-out asteroid than a station. It was a jagged monument of volcanic rock polished to a reflective sheen by cosmic dust and time. Veins of molten gold traced paths of energy beneath its surface, and docking bays gaped like ancient sleeping gods' mouths. Details. Aiden waved a hand dismissively. "The point is, this is day one. Just formalities and polite nods, or whatever the equivalent is for a towering being of living polished stone." He leaned forward, his smile softening into something more genuine. "You'll be fine, Jazz. You're the smartest person on the shuttle. Just stick to the script. I'll do the talking. You do the thinking. We'll be back at the hotel bar in Port Chimera before you know it, laughing about how worried you were." Jazz nodded, but her stomach tightened. She was a cultural attaché, a glorified intern on her first off-world assignment. Her job was to provide context, to smooth over the inevitable bumps in language and culture. She had spent the last 3 years memorizing Glypton honorifics and dietary restrictions for the gelatinous All of her studies, however, had failed to prepare her for a diplomatic strategy that amounted to a dare. "Docking sequence initiated," the shuttle's automated system announced. "Atmosphere in the fulcrum is a nitrogen-argon mix. Gravity is 1.8 standard Terran Gs. Please prepare for disembarkation." Aiden grunted as the artificial gravity shifted, the increased pull settling into his bones. He stood up, stretching his back. "All right, showtime. Remember, Jazz, unhelpful Smirks. It throws him off balance." He offered her a hand up. She took it. Her palm was damp. As they stood before the airlock, the moment's finality settled over her. They were the first humans to formally enter the grandest political body in the known universe, a compact of species forged in the crucible of planets that actively tried to kill them, and they were doing it, dressed for a barbecue. The fulcrum's grand chamber existed to intimidate. The ceiling soared miles overhead, dissolved in a shimmering haze of energy fields that held a breathable atmosphere against the cold vacuum. The walls were bare, matte black that reflected no light, and deadened sound, creating a profound stillness. Platforms for each delegation ringed a central dais, and figures from humanity's nightmares and myths occupied each platform. The Karkarons, hulking warriors with dense frames built for crushing abyssal pressures, wore power armor reputedly forged from stellar leviathans' bones. Their leader, Warlord Haken, stood rigid, a helmet glowing with sullen red light encasing his heavy-browed head. The Weaver constellation were beings of living light who flickered between states of matter, their thoughts echoing as a faint, dissonant chime in the minds of all present. And on the central dais, overseeing the proceedings, sat the Glypton. High Educator Zathani was a monument of living polished stone and intellect. Towering glyphs etched her smooth ebon skin, and she stood motionless, taking in every chamber with a single, vast optic that swirled with internal galaxies. The Glypton communicated status and intent through intricate glyphs etched into her skin over centuries of ritual and conflict. To a Glypton, unmarked skin signified either profound arrogance or supreme dominance. A statement that one's reputation was so immense it required no physical text. A stir of motion drew vast optic to the far entrance. The Terran delegation, the final piece. The Compact had observed them for decades, their signals a torrent of violence, poetry, and baffling commerce. They were clearly a Deathworld species. Earth was a maelstrom of tectonic instability, extreme weather, and a biosphere so viciously competitive it produced billions of micro-predators that could fell the planet's dominant life form. The Compact had extended the invitation out of a mixture of caution and curiosity. It was always better to have such creatures inside the tent. The doors hissed open. 2 figures emerged. A low murmur, a sound of shifting rock and scraping metal, swept through the assembled delegates. A low thrumming sound emanated from Zathani's vocal organ. The Terrans stood, exposed. They wore simple textiles, their soft flesh and unprotected heads open to the station's environment. An environment meticulously maintained to be survivable, but a challenge for any single species. They breathed the raw, scrubbed air and endured the crushing gravity, and they were smiling. Zathani leaned toward her junior aide, a young Glypton named Levon, whose skin was still largely unadorned. "Scan them," she sub-vocalized, her voice a series of soft, resonant tones. "Report on their energy shielding, their kinetic barriers, their biological enhancements. Something must be eluding our perception." Levon swept his long fingers across a console embedded in his forearm. His own single optic widened. "Educator, the scans are clean. Their readings are clear of personal energy fields or subdermal plating. Their attire registers as a simple cellulose-polymer blend. The station's life support systems are working overtime to scrub their biological output. Skin cells, microbes, respiratory vapor, they are raw." He tapped his fingers again. "The energy grid is still functioning to compensate. I am seeing a flood of error reports from the station's maintenance network." The lead human, designated as Ambassador Aiden Farrow, reached the Terran platform. He gave a small, informal wave to the silent chamber, his smile widening into a smirk. The gesture's casualness, its complete disregard for the occasion's ritualistic weight, felt like a tangible insult. Zathani's thoughts accelerated, trying to process the implications. For a species to appear in such a state was a declaration of such contemptuous power, it defied her framework for understanding. To stand unprotected in a room filled with the galaxy's most formidable beings was a declaration that everyone present was beneath their concern. To wear simple cloth suggested an immunity to all weapons. To smile in the face of it all meant the entire situation was a source of private amusement. She glanced at the energy readings from the station's core. The fulcrum's primary grid was indeed fluctuating, and the cause was internal. It was the bioscanners, the atmospheric regulators, the station's own life support, desperately trying to reconfigure their delicate balance around 2 beings emanating a torrent of raw biological data into the sterile environment. They were walking biohazards, and they seemed utterly unconcerned. Zathani leaned back to her aide, her voice a low thrum that held the dawning horror of a mathematician realizing they had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of numbers. "That fabric, it offers only decoration, does it?" The formal introductions began, a slow, ponderous ritual honed for millennia. Each delegate stepped forward, stated their name, titles, and the name of their homeworld, accompanied by a ritual gesture of respect or martial readiness. Warlord Haken slammed a gauntleted fist against his chest, producing a boom that echoed through the chamber. The Weaver constellation delegate emitted a clear chord that resonated with the station's core frequency. When his turn came, Aiden Farrow stepped to the edge of his platform. He clasped his hands behind his back, a posture of relaxed attentiveness. "Ambassador Aiden Farrow of Earth, on behalf of the Terran Commonwealth," he said, his voice clear and carried by its own strength, a stark contrast to the other's modulated pronouncements. "We're thrilled to be here. Honestly, it's a real honor. We're ready to hit the ground running and get to work." He finished with a nod. That was it. He offered only a string of idioms that sent every delegation's translation engines into a spiral of cross-references and error flags. On the dais, Synthani analyzed his statement from every angle. Her personal translator, cross-referencing countless Terran military and cultural databases, offered a series of possible interpretations, each more alarming than the last. Thrilled, a term associated with high-velocity kinetic experiences, often combat, an expression of eagerness for conflict. Hit the ground, a common Terran military phrase indicating the initiation of a surface-level invasion. Running, the act of aggressive forward movement. The combined phrase, stripped of its baffling cultural context, was a statement. We are eager to begin our planetary assault. Synthani subtly tapped a command into her armrest console. She flagged Ambassador Farrow's statement for high-level threat analysis and opened a priority channel to the Compact Strategic Archives. Query. She sent all known Terran military doctrines related to rapid terrestrial invasion, cross-reference with doctrines pertaining to unarmed shock troops, prioritize analysis of psychological warfare components. She had seen this before in the histories of long-dead civilizations, the strategy of an overwhelming predator. A predator displays utter contempt for its enemy's weapons. It speaks of its intended devastation as if it were a mundane administrative task. The humans were being deliberate. They had chosen their words with care. The Compact had mistaken their calculated wording for an insult. It was a warning. Aiden, certain his gambit was working, gave Jazz a small encouraging smile. It was going well. He had broken the ice, kept it light. He was defining the terms of engagement. Humanity was open, direct, and a species that approached matters with levity. Synthani stared at him, her vast optic unreadable, and he assumed his novel approach intrigued her. He doubled down. During a lull in the proceedings, while a series of pressurized hisses introduced a delegate from a species of sentient gas clouds, Aiden leaned over to the platform's comm unit, which connected him directly to the educator's dais. "Educator Synthani," he said, his voice a low, friendly murmur. "Just wanted to say, this place is incredible. You could swing a cat in here." Silence. On the dais, Synthani froze. Her translator flashed the literal meaning, then frantically searched for context. It found thousands of instances, each one contextually useless. It settled on the most direct interpretation, a boast about the chamber's suitability for a specific Terran ritual, presumably involving the high-velocity rotation of a small predatory mammal. A display of weaponized centrifugal force, a test of the chamber's structural integrity, a symbolic act of claiming territory. She made another note, her mind reeling. Terran delegates has expressed an intent to perform a ritual known as card swinging. Assess potential for spatial distortion or collateral damage. What is a card? Query Terran biosphere for creatures matching this description. Prioritize apex predators. Aiden saw her stillness and misinterpreted it as a communication breakdown. It's an expression, he clarified with a bright tone. It means it's spacious, roomy, big. A low thrum emanated from Synthani. Deception. He was obfuscating the true meaning. Of course he was. He meant the display for witnessing, not for understanding. The sheer alien nature of their aggression was the threat itself. A cold thread of understanding wound through her. In her 2 centuries presiding over this compact, she had seen species that could kill with a thought and civilizations that could shatter moons. The humans were beyond her experience. They were a walking, smiling, chattering paradox, a people that had apparently weaponized banality, and the day had just begun. The fulcrum's low resonant hum was a constant presence, the sound of countless tons of technology keeping a city-sized rock alive in the void. It was a sound of stability, of order, so when a high-pitched whine cut through it, every delegate in the grand chamber snapped their head upward. High above, nestled among the energy conduits and atmospheric regulators, a maintenance drone the size of a ground car sputtered. Struggling to adapt to the exposed human biosignatures, the station's systems had caused energy fluctuations that overloaded a minor circuit in the drone. A shower of blue sparks rained down from its chassis. The drone's magnetic clamps, holding a 3-ton acoustic dampener in place, flickered and died. For a moment, the massive cylinder of metal and gravitonic coils hung there, suspended by inertia. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, it broke free, landing with a ground-shattering thud. A chunk from the drone's magnetic housing, sheared off in the overload, tumbled after it. The smaller piece of shrapnel struck a circular conduit cover on the floor below with a sharp crack, sending sparks jetting from its seam. For the aliens, perception slowed. The Weaver constellation delegate dissolved into a cloud of scintillating motes, its physical form momentarily ceasing to exist. Warlord Hawkins' armor automatically engaged, a shimmering kinetic field snapping into existence around him as he braced for impact. The delegates from Kel, whose bodies were articulated stone, folded into hardened defensive spheres. The dampener was plummeting directly toward the Glypton delegation. Zathati remained frozen, her mind containing trajectories and impact velocities. She had a personal shield, of course, that would withstand a direct hit from a ship's plasma cannon. But her aides had less protection. It was a regrettable but acceptable loss. Protocol was clear. In the face of catastrophe, one holds one's ground. To do otherwise was to show weakness. The humans, however, operated outside protocol. Jazz screamed, a raw, sharp sound. Aiden tracked the falling object. In the instant the other species used to activate their advanced technologies, his brain, a messy, brilliant lump of evolved instinct, calculated the object's velocity, trajectory, and mass. Its path was clear, as were the Glypton aides standing frozen below. A solution formed. Ugly, desperate, and profoundly human. To his right stood a row of ceremonial flagpoles. They were slender, decorative things made of light but sturdy alloy. He lunged, his muscles protesting under the station's heavy pull, and wrenched one from its magnetic base with a grunt of effort. It was heavy, but manageable. His eyes darted between the plummeting dampener and the floor. The smaller piece of shrapnel that had fallen first had struck a meter-wide circular conduit cover, and he had seen sparks jet from its seam. The impact had shorted out its magnetic lock. The cover was now resting in its housing, unlatched and loose. He strided forward, planting his feet. His fencing instincts took over. The timing, the precision, the lunge. The failing dampener was a descending blade, and the Glypton delegation its current target. With the dampener just seconds from impact, a roaring shadow blotting out the lights above, Aiden jammed the flagpole's blunted tip into the damaged seam of the conduit cover, angled it downwards, and with a sharp, explosive motion born of 1,000 fencing drills, he flicked up his wrist and shoulders. Like a perfectly executed parry, the pole's tip caught the cover's lip just right. The unlatched 100-kilogram plate flipped up like a coin, turning 90 degrees into the dampener's path a half-second before impact. The impact was a deafening crack of shattering metal. The 3-ton acoustic dampener slammed into the edge of the vertical plate. It was like hitting a razor blade. The plate vaporized, but its momentary resistance was enough. The dampener, its trajectory altered by a few crucial degrees, plunged into the service tunnel's gaping hole instead of turning the Glypton aids into flattened ruin. It disappeared into the station's depths with a deafening, echoing boom that seemed to go on forever. A wave of concussive force and shrapnel erupted from the impact point. A razor-sharp fragment of the shattered cover, the size of a man's hand, spun through the air and sliced through the sleeve of Aiden's Hawaiian shirt, carving a deep, bloody gash into his forearm. He looked at the wound, his expression one of mild annoyance, like a man who had just spilled coffee on himself. In silence, he grabbed his colorful shirt's torn fabric, ripped a long strip from it, and tied a tight, functional pressure bandage around his bleeding arm with swift efficiency. He cinched the knot with his teeth, staring at the Glypton delegation's stunned faces. Then he dusted off his hands and gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug, as if to say, "Problem solved." The grand chamber was silent. The only sounds were the faint crackle of damaged electronics and the dampener's distant, fading echo crashing its way through the station's lower levels. Every delegate stared at the human. In the space of a few seconds, an unprotected, unenhanced creature had used wits and a decorative object to accomplish what their own advanced systems could not. He had perceived the threat, analyzed its physics, identified a structural weakness in his environment, engineered a complex mechanical solution, and executed it with a speed that defied belief. Then he had sustained a significant physical injury and treated it as a minor inconvenience, patching the wound with a piece of his own ridiculous attire. Warlord Haken stared, his combat-oriented mind replaying the event, failing to form a coherent tactical analysis. The human's movement had the speed of intent itself, something that bypassed physical mechanics. Beyond deflecting the dampener, he had commanded the station to open and swallow it. The display convinced Haken. The Terrans were hiding a power source of unimaginable costliness and sophistication, a biological energy field that allowed them to manipulate the physical world at will. Their flimsy cloth was a mockery of armor. On the dais, the internal galaxies of her vast optic swirled. Her analytical mind, which had guided the compact for centuries, stalled. She replayed the event, slowing it down, analyzing every micro-expression, every shift of weight. The human acted alone, relying on physical action and thought alone. The human had processed and executed the entire sequence of events within his unprotected biological brain. The sheer processing power required was staggering. To calculate the physics of a lever in that moment, under that pressure, was the work of a combat-grade supercomputer. To do it instinctively was the work of a god. She now understood. The casualness, the idioms, the floral shirt. It was a statement of fact. They were a species so far beyond the compact's understanding of strength that they operated by definitions of power alien to the compact. Armor was superfluous. They were their own weapons. Shields were redundant. The universe itself seemed to bend to their will. The fluctuations in the station's grid were a pretext for the accident. The accident was a test, orchestrated by the human to demonstrate his capabilities. She looked from Aiden's calm, blood-streaked face to the young female, Jazz Chandler. She was standing frozen, her face pale. Her hands trembled at her sides. Zathani had initially dismissed her as a subordinate, an apprentice, but a cold certainty settled on her. The male was the warrior, the physical manifestation of their power. The female, with her sigil of decimator, was its conceptual architect. The trembling was the vibration of some immense power held in check. The parlor was the physical cost of suppressing an even more devastating response. Humanity had sent 2 living weapons disguised as a delegation, wrapped in riddles and chaos, to see if the Apex Compact was worthy of their attention. Zathani straightened to her full height. When she spoke, her amplified voice resonated with authority. "I am suspending the proceedings. The Terran delegation will accompany me to my private chambers, immediately." Zathani's private chamber was austere and intimidating as the main hall, but on a smaller, more personal scale. A single block of black volcanic glass served as the table before bare walls, and the only light came from the glowing data streams projected onto the dark rock. Aiden sat, trying to look relaxed, while a Glypton medical drone silently sealed the gash on his arm with a spray of regenerative sealing. The drone's spider-like legs and myriad polished tools were unnerving, but the sealant was cool and soothing. Jazz stood rigidly by his side, looking like she was about to vibrate apart. "My apologies for that," Aiden said, gesturing with his newly repaired arm. "Our arrival seems to have put your station a bit on the fritz." Zathani, who stood across the table from them, ignored the pleasantry. She fixed her vast optic on Jazz's t-shirt. She raised a long, delicate finger and pointed. "We must define the meaning of this symbol," she said, her tone flat. A holographic display shimmered into existence above the table, showing a magnified, rotating image of the skeletal figure and the jagged text from Jazz's shirt. "Decimator. The term translates in all databanks to an act of mass destruction, the culling of a significant percentage of a population. Is this a chronicle of a past conquest, a statement of military capability, or a threat?" Aiden opened his mouth to deliver a witty, deflecting remark, but Jazz twisted her hands together and beat him to it. "Oh, no, it's not. It's a band," she stammered, wringing her hands. You know, music. It's a specific genre. Thrash metal." Zathani tilted her head, a slow, measured movement. Define thrash metal. Jazz swallowed. Well, it's loud and fast. It has aggressive guitar riffs, complex song structures, rapid-fire drumming. Its purpose is intensity. Seeing Zathani's blank expression, Aiden jumped in, hoping to smooth things over with a little classic pharaoh charm. Think of it as cultural ambassadors, he said with a small conspiratorial smirk. Their work is influential. Sometimes it even causes structural damage. He was thinking of mosh pits and crumbling concert hall plasters. The puzzle pieces snapped into horrifying configuration in her mind. Her mind cross-referenced the phrase structural damage with a deep archive query on Terran sonic capabilities. It found a single terrifying hit, a garbled data packet, likely military, that spoke of weapons using focused sonic waves to achieve tectonic effects. Decimator was a current weapon system, a sonic weapon powerful enough to cause tectonic-level destruction. The humans' conquest went beyond kinetic force. They shattered worlds with weaponized sound. The cultural ambassadors were the delivery system. The sigil on the female's shirt was a declaration. I am a bearer of the planet killer. A quiet settled over the chamber. Zathani stared at the two humans, her understanding of the universe rearranging itself into a new, stark shape. The male could bend physics to his will. The female could shatter civilizations with a song. And they had come here, to the heart of the galaxy's most powerful alliance, dressed in trophies and warnings. Zathani gave a slow, formal bow, a gesture of profound respect, usually reserved for beings of near-divine status. Your explanation is illuminating, she said, her voice a low thrum of dawning comprehension. I must consult the archives. She turned and swept from the room, leaving Aiden and Jazz alone in the silent chamber. Aiden's smirk faltered. He looked at Jazz, whose face had gone pale. Okay, he whispered. I'm starting to think they might be taking us a little too seriously. Warlord Hagen dealt in directness. His species, the Karkarons, had evolved in a world where the only philosophical debate was between predator and prey. Strength was the sole truth, and power the only language worth speaking. He had watched the display in the Grand Chamber, and while the Glypton educator saw a strategic mastermind, Hagen saw a trickster, a sorcerer hiding his true power behind jest and flimsy cloth. It was a derisive insult to the concept of honor. He found the human ambassador in the Fulcrum Central Nexus, a vast, open space where delegates mingled between sessions. Aiden was trying to sample a beverage from a dispenser, a viscous purple liquid that smelled of cinnamon and regret. Haken's approach was loud. Haken strode forward, his armored feet crashing against the deck plating with each step, drawing the attention of everyone in the Nexus. He stopped before Aiden, his shadow engulfing the smaller man. Human, he boomed, his voice a guttural amplifier. Aiden turned, the purple beverage paused halfway to his lips. Warlord? To what do I owe the pleasure? Pleasures have no value to the Karkaron, Haken snarled. Honor is, and you mock it. You hide your strength behind parlor tricks and baffling words. You treat this sacred compact as your personal jest. He slammed his massive power-armored gauntlet down on a nearby table. The table, forged from solid granite composite, cracked down the middle. The purple beverage in Aiden's hand sloshed precariously. The Karkarons demand a true accounting, Haken declared, raising his voice to a roar that silenced the Nexus. We demand a demonstration of your power in its fullest. I, Haken of Clan Vaskar, Slayer of the Void Leviathan, challenge you to the right of strength. The Nexus chatter died. No one had invoked the right of strength for over a century. It was a formal binding duel, a sacred ritual designed to strip away deception and reveal the true nature of a warrior. Aiden stared at the cracked table, then up at the hulking, furious warrior towering over him. His diplomatic instincts, his career built on de-escalation and witty banter, failed him. His lifetime of talking his way out of fights left him speechless. He started, but no words came out.
I have issued the challenge,
Haken bellowed, turning to the assembled delegates who watched, their expressions a mix of apprehension and morbid focus.
You must answer it. In the proving ground, at the next orbital alignment, let us see the true measure of humanity, if they have any.
With a final contemptuous snort, Haken turned and stormed away, his cape a leviathan hide swirling behind him. Aiden stood in the abrupt quiet, still holding his cup of purple goo. His strategy of disarming casualness had just earned him a challenge to trial by combat from a giant in power armor. He took a slow sip of the beverage. It tasted like static and poor life choices. Well, he muttered to himself, this has certainly escalated. Back in the Terran delegation's assigned quarters, which were comfortable, spacious, and felt like a luxury prison cell, Jazz paced the room's length, wrapping her arms around herself as if to keep from flying apart.
He wants to do what?
She demanded.
A right of strength? What does that even mean? Does he want to arm wrestle? Or is he going to try and tear you apart?
Aiden sat heavily on a block-pile piece of furniture that might have been a couch. His face, usually a picture of his usual composure, was pale. The smirk had vanished, replaced by the grim expression of a man who realized the game had changed beyond his control. I think the second option is more likely, he said, raking a hand through his hair. Did you see the size of him? His fists have fists.
So, what do we do? Jazz demanded. We can't just refuse, can we? That would be a massive diplomatic incident. They'd probably kick us out of the compact before we even finished unpacking.
Refusing's not an option, Aiden confirmed, his voice thin. According to the preliminary briefing, a formal challenge is binding. To refuse is to declare yourself dishonorable, a coward. For Deathworld species, that's an invitation for everyone else to preemptively declare war on you for being a liability.
So you have to fight him.
Jazz stopped pacing and stared at him.
Can you fight him?
Aiden let out a short, bitter laugh. Jazz, I'm a diplomat. My most strenuous physical activity in the last decade has been carrying too many groceries at once. I'm fluent in several languages and can negotiate a tariff agreement blindfolded, but my only real combat skill is, well, I was on the fencing team in university. He paused, a flicker of some distant memory in his eyes. I was pretty good, actually. But a ceremonial plasma axe likely follows different rules than an épée. He stood up and walked to the room's single, massive window. It looked out onto the star-dusted void and the fulcrum's unbelievable architecture. The weight of his failure settled on him, heavier than the station's gravity. I've doomed us, he said, his back to Jazz. My brilliant idea. I was so sure I could charm our way into a seat at the table. Instead, I've gotten us a spot on the sacrificial altar. Jazz watched him, her own fear giving way to a sharp frustration. The expert was as lost as she was. The realization was liberating. If the expert was out of ideas, then an idea from the intern, however audacious, was better than none.
No,
she said, her voice firm. Aiden turned, a skeptical look on his face.
We aren't doomed, she insisted, her expression hardened. We're just thinking about this like humans. Haken thinks you're some kind of kinetic god. Zathani thinks I'm a sonic doom witch. They're not operating on all reality. So we need to stop trying to bring them into ours and start operating in theirs.
She marched over to the room's main computer terminal and hit the panel with her palm.
You're the fencer, I'm the nerd. He challenged you to a right of strength. He wants to know your true nature.
A fierce grin spread across her face.
Okay, let's show it to him.
While Aiden stared confused, she swept her fingers across the holographic interface as an idea took shape. She was a cultural attaché, and it was time to start attaching some culture.
I'm diving into the Compact's database, she announced. Their foundational laws mandate the legal archive be a public trust accessible to any delegate. They're so ancient they probably think of information security as just a stronger lock on the library door. He has defined the battlefield. Now we define the rules of engagement. For hours, the interface's soft chime and Jazz's occasional mutters of frustration or discovery were the only sounds in the room. Aiden paced like a trapped animal, offering suggestions that Jazz waved away, her focus locked on the screen, feeling his constructed world crumble around him. He traded in words, and they had failed him. Now, his life and potentially the future of humanity's galactic relations rested on the research skills of an over-caffeinated 22-year-old in a heavy metal t-shirt. Okay, I've got something, Jazz said, leaning so close to the holographic screen her nose almost touched it. Here it is. The Cochrane Rite of Strength, a cultural and legal analysis. She stared, reading aloud, her voice quick and excited. It says here the rite is a binding ritual intended to reveal a competitor's true nature. It is a ritual that seldom ends in death. A competitor achieves victory by forcing the opponent into a state of cloth, a term that roughly translates to honorable submission or acknowledgement of superior essence. Superior essence, Aiden repeated dryly. Wonderful. Does it say how one might demonstrate this superior essence? Preferably in a way that doesn't involve bisection. I'm getting to that. Jazz sped to the dense block of text. She pulled up an archival recording of a rite from over a century ago. The image flickered to life, showing two massive Cochrane warriors circling each other in a sandy arena. Their movements were brutal, powerful, and direct. They crashed against each other like asteroids, their battle a maelstrom of predictable rhythmic violence. Oh, this isn't helping, Jazz, Aiden said, feeling sick. Wait, she said, and she narrowed her eyes in concentration. She ignored the fight, focusing instead on the biometric data scrolling alongside the video. Heart rate, adrenal response, auditory sensory input. Here. She pointed to a small, almost unnoticeable detail in the Cochrane physiological profile. Look at their auditory range. It's incredible. They can hear frequencies far higher and lower than we can. It's how they track prey in the metallic jungles of their home wild. But she cross-referenced the data with another file, a cultural treatise on Cochrane art and music. A slow smile spread across her face. Their music, it's all percussive, rhythmic, cadent, simple, powerful patterns. There's a note here from a Kell anthropologist that says, the Cochrane minds find comfort and honor in predictable, resonant patterns. They consider dissonance and arrhythmia physically unsettling and spiritually dishonorable. She looked up from the screen, a rebellious light shone in her eyes. She looked at her own t-shirt, at the jagged logo, then at Aiden. Unsettling and dishonorable, she repeated, the seed of a plan bloomed. Aiden, what is the most structurally complex, rhythmically chaotic, and dissonant music humanity has ever created? Aiden stared at her. The implications of her plan coalesced in his mind. The misunderstanding about her shirt, the Cochrane biology, his challenge, insane, a prank. It was quite possibly the only chance they had. Decimator, he breathed. Decimator, she confirmed with a grin. Haken wants to see your true nature? Let's give him an auditory lobotomy. Later that night, long after Jazz had fallen into an exhausted sleep over the console, Aiden found himself standing by the window again. The fulcrum glittered below, a city of silent alien light. His entire career rested on a foundation of control, guiding conversations and shaping outcomes through careful words and predictable logic. He was a master of de-escalation, a man who could find common ground between mortal enemies. But out here, his methods were inflammatory. They'd interpreted his every attempt at reason as a threat, his casualness as a power play, his jokes as declarations of war. He had tried to play chess, only to find his opponent was playing a game with rules beyond his comprehension. Trusting Jazz meant abandoning his entire diplomatic philosophy and trust a plan that felt more like something a rebellious teenager would concoct than a strategy for first contact. He had to walk into a combat arena against a giant killing machine, and his only weapon would be a song. Absurd, terrifying. He looked at his reflection in the window. The confident ambassador had vanished. In his place was a tired man, the smirk gone, a deep unease etched around his eyes. But beneath his unease, something else stirred, a flicker of the university fencer, the young man who loved the intricate dance of attack and parry, the thrill of outthinking an opponent. This was just a different kind of fencing. The weapon was perspective. The target was an entire worldview. He took a deep breath, the processed air cool in his lungs. He had built his career preventing chaos. Now, he had to embrace chaos to become it. He walked over to his travel bag and pulled out a plain black t-shirt. The Hawaiian shirt went into the recycler. It was time for a change in wardrobe. Jazz worked through the station's quiescent period, her focus consumed by the data streams. The first part of her plan required deep diving into the compact's legal archives, a labyrinth of cross-referenced statutes and amendments going back thousands of years. She was looking for a loophole in the rite of strength's rigid ceremony. And she found it. She found an archaic and long-forgotten clause buried in the rite's founding statutes, under countless regulations about blade length and shield integrity standards. Statute 9.4. It permitted a challenger, prior to the commencement of combat, to present a psalmic declaration of intent. It was an ancient tradition from a species that went extinct 5 millennia ago, a species who sang their challenges instead of speaking them. The clause remained, forgotten. A psalmic declaration, Jazz whispered, a triumphant grin on her face. A battle song. And the best part? The statute dictates that the arena system must accept and broadcast any file in the correct ceremonial format automatically and without oversight. The plan's second part was a technical challenge. The statute specified submitting any such declaration in the long-dead Karkaran ceremonial audio format. It was a bizarrely complex format, less about sound waves and more about resonant frequencies and tonal sequences, designed for instruments carved from the living rock of their home world. Converting a digital recording of a 21st century thrash metal song into this arcane format was like trying to translate Shakespeare into binary using only an abacus. She spent hours reverse engineering the file structure from archival recordings, writing custom code on her personal comm unit to map the distorted guitar tones to resonant frequencies and the complex drum patterns to rhythmic shockwave notations. She had to painstakingly convert every cymbal crash, every snarling vocal, every blistering guitar solo into a language of mathematical vibration. After nearly 8 hours of relentless work, she finished. She packaged the file, labeled it Declaration of Intent, Pharaoh Aiden Ambassador Terran Commonwealth, and submitted it through the official channels for the rite. A moment later, a small notification appeared on her screen. The Fulcrum's automated legal system, a vast and ancient AI that cared for procedure over content, had processed the submission. The file met the formatting requirements according to Statute 9.4. The request was valid. Submission accepted. Psalmic declaration scheduled for presentation in the proving ground. Jazz leaned back, trembling, drained, and wired. She had just weaponized a 40-year-old piece of music. Now, it was all up to Aiden. The walk to the proving ground was the longest of Aiden's life. He moved through the Fulcrum's silent, black glass corridors, flanked by 2 impassive Glypton honor guards. Delegates from every species lined the passageways, their alien faces a mixture of morbid curiosity, respect, and contempt. To them, he was a man walking to his death. But they also saw a man wearing simple cloth. He had chosen the plain black t-shirt and simple denim trousers. It was a stark, somber contrast to his earlier attire. He no longer smirked. His expression was one of calm, focused determination. What the delegates saw was a man preparing to deliver a judgment. It was the ultimate expression of confidence. A being who considered the galaxy's most feared warrior so trivial, a threat that he would face him in nothing more than simple cloth. The unprotected human's legend was cementing itself with every step he took. The proving ground was a vast circular arena carved from the asteroid's heart. The floor was black sand, and the walls rose up into darkness, ringed with spectator platforms. The air in the arena was heavy and still. Aiden walked to the arena's center and stood there, a small, solitary figure in the immense space. 1,000 alien eyes were on him, analyzing him, judging him. He closed his own eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and remembered the plan. Endure. That was all he had to do. A deafening roar announced Hawkins' arrival. The warlord entered from the arena's opposite side, a figure of martial terror. Having shed his formal power armor for a lighter, more agile combat rig, he brandished a crackling plasma axe, its energy blade hissing and spitting in the air. He was a mountain of dense flesh and muscle and barely contained fury. Haken beat his armored chest with his free hand, the sound of a thunderous drumbeat.
Human!
He bellowed. His bellow shook the sand at Aiden's feet.
You have come. This is good. Your deception ends now. Reveal your weapon. Show me the power you hide behind your soft flesh.
Aiden stood his ground. He opened his eyes and looked at Haken, his gaze steady. He held up a single, empty hand. My weapon is the truth of my people, he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying across the arena. He turned his head slightly and nodded toward the control booth high above, where Jazz watched, hovering a hand over a console. This is our battle song, Aiden declared. This is Decimator. Jazz hit play. A silent moment passed. Then, the arena's speakers, a system designed to broadcast planetary address and emergency alerts across the entire station, erupted. The opening notes of Chandeliers of Collapse blasted through the proving ground at a volume that was physically painful. It was more than sound. It became a physical force, a wall of compressed noise that hit the delegates like a shockwave. An aggressive, distorted guitar riff, a snarling, purposeful progression of notes, new to the galaxy, tore through the air. The thunderous, blisteringly fast crack of a snare drum and the deep, seismic boom of a kick drum followed. Then the vocals began. A venomous, rhythmic snarl spat with condensed aggression. To the aliens, it was auditory chaos, a terrifying wall of noise. But to Haken, it was something far, far worse. It was a cognitive attack. The Cochrane mind, and especially the Cochrane warrior's mind, builds itself on rhythm. The beat of a war drum, the cadence of a charge, the predictable pattern of an opponent's movements. These were the foundations of their combat philosophy. Combat was a dance, a brutal but ordered ballet of action and reaction. This was the antithesis of order. Structural dissonance and polyrhythmic complexities that his brain struggled to process filled the music. The guitars played riffs that twisted and turned in unpredictable ways, defying any sense of melodic resolution. The drums were a frenetic, stuttering heartbeat, a storm of arrhythmic beats that overwhelmed his ability to find a cadence. The guitar solo's high-frequency shriek was like sharp needles driving directly into his auditory sensors. He tried to push through it, to focus on his opponent. He raised his plasma axe, stepped forward, but his body refused to obey. His instincts were screaming. The sound was a violation, a deep, soul-shaking blasphemy against the nature of combat. The sound scrambled his thoughts, shattered his focus, and destroyed his sense of rhythm for the fight. Stumbling, he dropped his axe with a clang to clap his hands over the auditory canals on the sides of his head. His roar of confusion and pain swallowed by the relentless auditory assault. And in the center of it all, the human stood still. Aiden stood unmoving. He just stood there, his expression unreadable, as the symphony of chaos washed over the arena. He endured. He let the cacophony buffet him, his small form an anchor of stillness in a storm of sound. This was more than a song. It was a weapon of psychological warfare. The human commanded and embodied this auditory assault, an anchor of stillness completely immune to its devastating effects. Haken had demanded the human reveal his true nature. He had. His nature was a symphony of destruction. Haken, his tactical mind dismantled, his warrior spirit broken by a violation of his reality rather than a weapon, sank to one knee, defeated. Beyond besting him in combat, the human had strategically and spiritually annihilated him while he remained untouched. Haken lowered his head and clasped the ultimate gesture of honorable submission. The music cut out abruptly, leaving a jarring quiet in its wake. The only sound was Hakon's ragged, gasping breaths. In the control booth, Jazz slumped against the console, her entire body shaking. In the stands, Zathani stared, her vast optic wide with a terrifying, wondrous revelation. The humans were more than warriors of flesh and bone. They were more than sorcerers who bent the laws of physics. They were something far more potent and far more dangerous. They were a weapon of perspective. Their attacks bypassed the body. They attacked the definition of reality. They had defeated the Compact's greatest warrior by attacking his definition of a fight. Aiden walked across the black sand, his steps slow and deliberate. He stopped before the kneeling, defeated warlord. He extended his hand, a simple gesture of aid. Hakon looked up, stunned, his deep-set eyes filled with a new, dawning understanding. He hesitated for a moment, then took the offered hand. Aiden pulled him to his feet. The gesture was simple, quiet, and in the arena's context, more powerful than any blow. Our strength isn't in what we can break, Aiden said, his voice calm and steady for Hakon's ears alone. It's in what we can create that others can't understand. In the aftermath, humanity secured its place in the Apex Compact. The Compact's view of them shifted from arrogant upstarts or dangerous unknowns to a species that wielded a power the Compact had a limited framework for and few defenses against: culture itself. They were the ultimate unconventional thinkers, the cosmic tricksters, and they treated them with a mixture of cautious respect and profound intellectual curiosity. The Compact recorded the right of strength in its archives as the most decisive and bizarre victory in its long history. Warlord Hakon, instead of shame, felt a new purpose. He became one of humanity's most stalwart proponents. He had faced their essence and found it superior. He now viewed them with the deep respect a traditional swordsman might have for a master of a completely alien martial art. He even began a formal request to have the Karkrid military study Terran musical theory as a form of cognitive combat training. High Educator Zathani, for her part, initiated a formal academic exchange with Jazz Chandler. Their weekly transmissions became the talk of the diplomatic community, as the ancient Glypton scholar and the young human intern held deep philosophical discussions on the cultural significance of 21st century punk rock, the semiotics of rapidly evolving image-based Terran ideograms, and the mathematical beauty of a perfect guitar solo. Months later, at the Apex Compact's next formal session, Ambassador Aiden Farrow took his seat at the Terran platform. He wore a different hibiscus shirt, a silent, understood joke between him and the other delegates. The atmosphere had shifted from tension to one of collegial, if slightly nervous, curiosity. During a recess, Warlord Hakon approached him with a question instead of a challenge. He pointed a massive clawed finger at the ceramic mug of coffee Aiden was holding. On its side was a picture of a cartoon cat clinging desperately to a tree branch.
Ambassador?
Hakon rumbled, his voice full of genuine, earnest curiosity.
I must understand. This new sigil you display, what great truth does it signify?
Aiden looked down at the mug, at the wide-eyed kitten, at the words printed below. Hang in there. He looked up at the giant warrior. He glanced out at the assembled delegates of the galaxy's most powerful species, all of whom were subtly trying to overhear his answer, ready to parse it for hidden meanings and cosmic truths. Aiden just smiled.